So election coming up, and I'm kind of excited about it because uh, I'm just kidding. It is very interesting. The parties in the UK are more fragmented than they've ever been before, and the outcome of the election is it's not an either-or situation. I mean, the UK is not a two-party system here. There are a number of other parties that are active and somewhat successful, but up until recently, they've been fairly niche, fairly small, with small impacts. So you could treat the UK as a two-party system, even if it technically wasn't. Nowadays, though, you just haven't got any single party with majority support. The support is fragmented. For example, the Conservatives are in a situation now where they've got the Brexit Party, which has emerged. And in the poll of polls, the Brexit Party is siphoning, well, let me say this. The Brexit Party has support of about 10% in the polls, which is a kind of make or break margin. If that entire 10% were supporting Conservatives instead, if the Brexit Party hadn't emerged, if that 10% were over with the Conservatives would currently be polling at 48%. So nearly where they would need to be to form a majority government. With the current polling, they're at 38%, which if that's what happens in the election, that would translate into 317 seats in Parliament. They would need 326 to have a majority, so they would still need 9 more seats from somewhere. So even the Conservative Party, which is far and away the strongest party in the polls right now, isn't in a position to form a majority government. Now, you could say, hang on a minute, you can't assume that that 10% of Brexit voters are all going to be supportive of the Conservatives. So in the aftermath of the election, they would all just partner up and you'd have your Tory Brexit coalition. The problem is that I don't know what proportion of that Brexit party support, but a real and significant proportion of it are disaffected Leave Labour supporters. So people who traditionally, historically, have been Labour voters who have decided to support Brexit instead because the Labour Party doesn't have any kind of commitment to leave. So I don't think it's fair to say that all of those Brexit voters would want to join up into a coalition with the Tories should that be the outcome. But I suspect most would. So you've got a pretty potent combination there between the Tories and the Brexit Party. Versus on the other side, you've got Labour polling at 26% to the Tories' 38%. This is from the poll of polls, by the way. It's an aggregate of all of the big polls. The Liberal Democrats are currently polling at 16%. So if you add up all of the Labour support and all the Lib Dem support, you get 42%. All of the Conservative support and the Brexit Party support together, you get 48%. So even if Labour and the Liberal Democrats joined forces, they would struggle to outperform the Conservative Brexit coalition, if that existed. You would have to add in the SNP, the Scottish National Party, and the Green Party, which are polling at 4% and 3% respectively, in order to take that Labour-Lib Dem coalition, if such a thing could emerge, to a higher level of support than the Tories, the Conservative side. So it's a very steep hill to climb for Labour. It's a very steep hill to climb for the Lib Dems. What they are offering in terms of, and let's be honest, this is a national election. It's for the control of Parliament. It should not be a single issue election, but it appears that it's going to be. It's going to be completely about Brexit, which is a shame. But this is where we are, and it's the most emotive issue right now that's getting people really passionate on both sides in the UK. So the parties are pitching their election pitch specifically at Brexit and whether people are supporting it or not supporting it. Labour has really struggled with its position because there are a substantial proportion of Labour voters who support Leave. So it's not as though the Labour Party has a unified voter base of Remainers. It doesn't. So they have tried to thread that needle by walking on the line, staying on the fence. I mean, their proposal, their pitch to voters is that if you vote for Labour, we will go back to the EU and ask them to start over and renegotiate a brand new deal. Because we want a new deal to include some characteristics that we're not prepared to really specify. We don't really know what it is that they want changed. Although, I mean, to be fair, they said some things like they want the UK to remain in the EU customs union. So there are some things we understand about what it is that Labour has in mind, but we don't really know. They say that they want to go back to the EU, they want to renegotiate a brand new deal, and then organize another referendum in which the public will be able to choose between cancelling Brexit and taking the deal and leaving. Now, you might argue that's a reasonable approach given the circumstances. I don't think there's anything inherently unreasonable about it. But if you're making a pitch to voters, I think it stinks. I think it's muddled, it's vague, it implies a lot of additional delays. And I'm not sure who it's meant to appeal to. I'm not sure who's meant to be inspired to get off their chair and go vote for that. That's just me. Now, the Tories, on the other hand, have a pretty clear-cut proposal. They have a deal that they've negotiated with the EU. If they win the election, they will implement the deal and they will extract the UK from the EU, which obviously is pitched to appeal to Leavers and not to Remainers. But here's the thing. To be fair to the Remainers, they have been fragmented as well, but in the last 3.5 years, the Remain side, which claims to have a majority of support in the public, has been completely ineffective at stopping this process, or even throwing any substantial roadblocks in the way. They've managed to slow things down on occasion. They've managed to stop Boris Johnson from doing some of the more egregious power grabs that he's attempted. But really, it all comes down to this election, and if the Remain vote doesn't get it together, we're about to leave the EU, despite the Remainers supposedly being better educated, nicer, fairer people who are smarter and more moral and apparently incapable of achieving political ends. So we shall see. We shall see. The result of the election could be a coalition between Labour and the Lib Dems and the Greens and the SNP, all coming together with the singular purpose of stopping Brexit. As for me, I will not be voting Conservative. I did vote Leave in the referendum, and if it's held again, I suspect I will vote Leave again. But I can't support the Conservative Party for social justice and economic inequality reasons. There's no way I could vote for that. So I'm not really sure who I'm going to vote for. I'm going to be looking specifically at the policy proposals that are non-Brexit related, and I'll be looking at some strategy really, whether the Libs or the Lib Dems or the Greens or whoever have a better chance of winning. Milton Keynes is my MP currently is a Tory, a Conservative. And he's a nice guy. When I worked at the foundation, I had quite a lot of opportunities to talk to him and get to know him. In fact, we spent a day touring around a bunch of sites in Milton Keynes that were owned by the foundation. So I was taking him on a tour and had quite an extended period of time to chat with him and get to know him a bit. And he is a nice, decent guy. I have no issue with him, apart from the fact that he supports economic policies that I just cannot support. So I'm not going to be voting for Ian, but I don't know who I will be voting for yet. I'm looking at it and I am researching it. So fingers crossed that it's not a total disaster. I'm not sure that there's a non-disastery result to this. I think every potential result is going to be a bit of a nail biter to see how they do, because I have not changed my view on the quality of leadership in the government amongst any of the parties right now. They're pathetic. So that's where we are. It's a big question mark. No really good options on the ballot, no heroes in waiting, nobody that you can look to and say, now that's the person that needs to be running the country right now. There's nobody, which is a national tragedy, I'm sorry to say. So anyway, let's all cross our fingers and hope for the best. Thanks for listening.